So politics is a funny thing, Cindy, because last week you had the situation where Finance Minister Guan Eng, ex-PM Datuk Raja Razak, claimed that the Public Accounts Committee vindicated both of them, and that can't be right.
They can continue to argue till the cows come home.
Which is literally what politics is, right? You know, arguing your point. But I think the more important thing was that this story pointed out was that GST refunds did not make their way back to businesses.
You're right. And what happened was the fund was redirected to the consolidated fund and was used for operating expenses. And therefore, and when the customs actually asked for money back for refunds, they were not given the money.
That is not technically wrong, because I thought that you had to return the money to the businesses within a certain number of days.
There is a 14-day timeline, technically, but there is also an allowance in the law for when the customs need more time.
Irwan Surugas actually sort of testified, right, that there was a delay because if they processed quickly, that's his exact words, they can say that there was no money there to be given back. So they said it was prioritized for other ways.
It was clear, I think, from the testimony that the refunds were deliberately delayed because there was just no money.
So quibbling aside, politics aside, I think the bigger question that should be asked here is, why was there no money?
Okay, the short answer is that revenues have not been growing as fast as operating expenses, which is the amount needed to pay salaries,
pensions,
debt service charges, pensions, you name it. That's basically your operating expenses, what you spend before, and you're not talking about development expenditure where it's necessary for the country's growth. So you've not even reached there. It's just your day-to-day, correct, covering your bills. You're right.
The thing that you pointed out was that for a while we were okay, but around 2017, that's when it started to crunch, right? Did you notice that?
Okay, that actually was from the PAC report, because they gave a month-to-month account of how much was asked for refunds and how much was actually given for refunds. So in the beginning, in 2015 and much of 2016, it was okay. And there was only a shortfall in December 2016. And it was okay again in January 2017, but from February 2017 onwards, every month there is a shortfall between what was asked for refunds and the money they actually got. So basically they didn't get enough for refunds.
So that also disputes what Najib was saying, that he says the problems only started before when GST was zeroized. That was his argument on Facebook. But I think it's more worrying to me, why is it that our revenue is not catching up, or that we're not making enough to at least even pay the base?
I would put it the other way around. Probably it's our expenditure has been growing a bit too fast. That our revenue growth isn't catching up.
All right. And that itself is very, very worrying.
Yes, that is worrying.
And that's what's worrying the current government, isn't it? That's why they're trying to do all these major cost-cutting exercises. The one stat that worried me in this whole story was this whole thing about how current balance has dwindled.
You're very right, Nadia.
In the chart you pointed out, in this little green bar, towards the end of this, I can't see the green bar anymore. What does that mean for the country?
Okay, basically this current balance, the little green bar that you mentioned, that's the difference or the money that you have left after deducting operating expenses from government revenue. So let's say government revenue is $100. Malaysia basically has been spending $99 on operating expenses. So that little green bar will be the $1 left. And it used to be about 20 in about 1997, which was when we still had a surplus, budget surplus. But in the past 10 years, it has basically fallen to about $1. And what that means is that if there's any shortfall in revenue, which is what the excess GST refunds would indicate, then you would have not enough revenue to cover operating expenses.
And there's this rule that while you can borrow for development,
you can't borrow for operating expenses.
So how is the country really stuffed if that happens?
In some ways,
You have to elaborate. What do you mean some ways? I mean, okay.
So because operating expenses, things like salaries and pensions and debt service charges, that's easily 60% of all spending. Okay. And those are the things that you can't cut. So you're left with managing things like subsidies and
some of the other
expenses, which would be very significant if you begin cutting. So, which is what some of the things that the current government is looking at is to look at some of these other expenses, which is why plugging linkages is actually very important.
But the long and short of it is, politics aside, we can't continue on like this, can we?
No, you can't. You need to look at ways to expand revenue. That's important, so that you have more leeway. And very important is to look at our operating expenses to really cut things that you don't have to spend.
For more on the stories, pick up a copy of The Edge Weekly at all good newsstands.